Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Ari Thurger, and today, in general terms, I'm going to talk about the idea of rebirth in Old Norse religion. This wasn't a video requested by any of my patrons this time, but nonetheless, I would like to dedicate this video to one of them, Miss Jenny Lee Rip. A couple of months ago, we were talking about this idea of rebirth, so, well, here it is. This video is a sort of continuation of the previous video entitled The Cult of the Dead in Old Norse Religion, as well as the continuation of the videos about the Emingja and the Fylgja. I'll put the links to these videos in the description down below in this video. And I advise you to watch those first and then come back to this video, well, for a better understanding on the conception of rebirth in Old Norse religion. So, we are all seeking answers in relation to our own existence and purpose in this world. Why we live and why we die. Well, what's the purpose? And if there is anything else after this? But perhaps we are asking the wrong questions. When it comes to rebirth, perhaps the question isn't why or how many times have we lived and died. Maybe the question is, why do we keep returning? I do hope you enjoy this video. To understand this conception of rebirth, let's go back to the concept of the Emingja. And again, I do advise you to watch that video where I explore that idea, the Emingja, in more detail. Anyway, Emingja, in a nutshell, it is the personification of the good fortune of a person. Not in an abstract conception of it, but as a kind of soul-like protective spirit, which is closely associated with the Fylgja. This understanding of good fortune as a spiritual entity or force that belongs to the individual, there was the belief that when a person died, this good fortune, this luck, this Emingja could take on shape outside the physical body and could be transferred to another person, be that of the family or outside the family. The Emingja could be inherited, but not in a total sense of an ancestral spirit that passes on from generation to generation, but rather a soul-like spirit that chooses to live on in another person. And so the luck of a person is passed on to another. The Emingja is this force, the good luck and good fortune that goes beyond abstract conceptions. And this force could take on shape, become a Fylgja, a spirit with a particular shape to that of the person it belonged to, or in the shape of an animal, as the personification of the person's personality. And this spirit could wander about. In other words, try to picture a specific force, a specific formless and shapeless entity. This is the Emingja, and when it takes a specific form outside the body it resides, it becomes a Fylgja. The Emingja is the total amount of spiritual power a person is in possession of, a supernatural power of sorts, which is consciousness and lives on. Again, I advise you to watch the other videos, and if you have any problems in clicking in this information icon in this upper corner that leads to those videos, don't worry, just go down below into the description of this video and you will find the links to all of these videos. Now, what is important to retain here is that there is an idea of continuation of existence and can be passed on to others. Thus, the consciousness lives on and on and on. What we are dealing with in here is the belief in survival. And an essential part of the belief in survival is, of course, rebirth. On the previous video about the cult of the dead, one of the examples I've given to you about the worship of the burial dwellers was Olaf Holfra, which people continued to worship him after his death, a cult performed in his burial mound. Now, pay close attention at this account. When Olaf died, he appeared in a dream of a man named Rani. Olaf, in the dream, gave this man instructions to break into his burial mound, take Olaf's gold ring, knife and belt, and he must fight the dweller of the burial mound, a Draugr, Olaf himself in physical form. Pay close attention at the notes. After Rani successfully takes Olaf's ring, knife and belt, Olaf instructed him that he must go to Queen Austa, the wife of Harald the Greenlander. She is waiting to give birth to a child. Rani is to speak with the queen, and he must ask the queen that if she has a boy, Rani wants to choose the name of the child. And to sort of convince the queen, Rani gives her Olaf's belt, and he is to name the child Olaf as well. And when the boy is born, he gives him Olaf's ring, as well as the knife, or in other accounts, it's a sword. The son is born to Queen Austa, and this boy would be the famous King Olaf the Holy. This King Olaf, at some point in his life, visits the burial mound of the former King Olaf Grestadahólfr, the one his ring, sword and name belong to. There is a long conversation between King Olaf the Holy with one of his bodyguards, in which the bodyguard asks the king if that was the place, if that place they were facing had been the place where Olaf had been buried once. And the bodyguard insists on this, and we clearly have the perception that the bodyguard thinks that King Olaf is facing his own burial mound when he was Olaf Grestadahólfr. The king is clearly vexed by this, and he denies all of it. And he specifically says, "My soul has never had two bodies, it cannot have them." So this is particularly important. The bodyguard thinks this is a case of reincarnation. He is a Christian bodyguard. But the king himself denies all of this, and he is clearly expressing an idea of rebirth. It's not the same soul in a different body, but it's part of the spirit of the mound dweller, the other Olaf, that is inside this new Olaf. Further ahead, the differences between rebirth and reincarnation will be more clearly expressed, don't worry. But don't forget this particular account. So, this is a very interesting account that reflects the belief in rebirth. It's clear that it was important to give to the child the exact same name. With the name, it would seem that some part of the dead man enters into the child. And this is exactly the same belief expressed in the Hemingia. For a person to inherit the luck, good fortune, power, abilities and everything that encompasses the amount of good qualities of a person, the person must be named after the one whose great qualities are to be passed on to this new person. Naming someone after another was to sort of invoke the power of the deceased and insert it into the chosen child. In this way, the deceased not only lives on, but his great qualities are acquired by his namesake. And it's particularly interesting, the personal ring and sword the new child receives. Status symbols, symbols of power, personal objects that in a way contain the essence of the deceased and no doubt have been important to the dead person while in life. But it isn't a case of wanting or wishing to continue to possess such objects. He needs new form, but rather to pass on his power to the new child, and such power resides in the personal objects. An animistic conception of this idea. In this way, we also understand why Hemingia is often related to shape-shifting, the change of shape, the change of appearance, Hamra, because part of the soul of the person will live on in another person. So the person changes appearance, changes Hamra. So this is the understanding of rebirth in Old Norse religion, not to be confused with reincarnation, in which it is the same soul inhabiting different bodies through time. Rebirth in here is precisely the idea of survival. Part of the person lives in another. So it's not strictly the case of a single soul, but part of a person's consciousness that will live on inside another person. And it's also important to take note that this idea of rebirth is connected to the cult of the burial mound. You will continue to find in a variety of Old Norse sources this connection between the mound dweller and his name given to another, and the deceased lives on. In the sagas and poems, when cremation is the funerary practice, there is the belief that the spirit will go away into some other reality. The destruction of the body releases the spirit and the spirit moves on. Whilst when the funerary practice is burial, the belief is that the spirit lingers in the grave. So this idea of rebirth in Old Norse religion can only be applied to cases of burial. When someone's spirit is left behind or starts to inhabit a particular place because the spirit of the person is attached to a specific physical body or physical place. The spirit of the person can only manifest itself in the physical reality if it is able to inhabit something or someone physical. If the body is kept intact, for instance, or if the spirit attaches itself to some other physical body. This is the reason for the worship of the dead and the ceremonies held in their burial places, because the spirits continued to live in the place, which gave rise to the belief of land spirits, spirits of place, and the elves, which are ancestral spirits that remain attached to their burial places. And so they propitiate all sorts of blessings. So this is rebirth, a form of survival, continuing to live on among the community, either in the place of burial or within another person who takes on the name of the deceased. There are many accounts that express this idea of rebirth in Old Norse religion, and I have picked another literary work which I think it serves as, well, yet another good example of giving to a child the name of another, and so the child inherits certain qualities and traits of the dead person. In Thordar Saga Reido, a woman named Elga gave birth to a boy, and to him it was given the name Thordur, after his father. It could be seen on the boy that he had a scar on his left arm, in the same place his father had been wounded. When they saw this mark, to the child it was immediately also given his father's surname, and so the child was called Thordur Reida. Another particularly interesting account in Verdensdela Saga, in which a dying man named Jokul begs the man who has slain him to not let his name pass away. And so he asks his killer to give his own name to the son or grandson of the killer, which is obviously kind of strange. "Father, what does my name mean? Why do you have chosen it?" "Well, son, it's the man I've killed." A bit bleak, and the son grows up to form a black metal band. Anyway, another account specifically related to the Hemingja in Sverdila Saga, the man named Thorrofr begs his brother to give his name to a son he might have in the future. Thorrofr asks his brother to name one of his sons Thorhufr as well, and as such the dying Thorhufr will grant all his luck to the child. All his spiritual power he grants to the child with his namesake. Now, there is a great amount of sagas expressing this, giving the name of the deceased or the dying to a child, and so the person lives on. As said before, it's a tradition without boundaries. It could be within the family or outside the family, among brothers, friends, even among enemies, and from husband to the child his wife is carrying, which might be his or from another man's. And we even have cases of adopting children and giving to them the name of someone of the new family, and thus breaking any links with the child's ancestors, and so the child inherits the power, the luck, the spiritual qualities of the ancestors of his new family, and also naming the child after dead foster parents. Apparently, the name might be changed if it did not seem to suit the child. Again, this is a question of survival and making sure a living person born anew into this world can continue on with the memory of those who are gone. The consciousness passes on into the new child, and thus there is this belief in rebirth, the belief in continuation of the spirit in this world. But of course, it's not just a question of survival, but also to incorporate the qualities of the deceased. Hence the reason why apparently the name could be changed from time to time if the person wanted to inherit the qualities of another that best suited the person. Giving to a child the name of that person, it's not only restricted to male cases. This also happened with girls, of course. Giving the baby girl the name of a recent dead person. But the only problem is that in these particular cases, we do not have a great amount of information as we have when naming boys, sadly. But yes, this tradition was also applied to girls, often given to them the nickname of the dead person, or just part of it. But it's clear that this tradition of giving the name of the dead to a new child, the name is often of someone who has recently died. We also have accounts of someone who, while alive, the person's name is given to a child, and both coexist in the same reality. Both are alive. And these examples express this idea of rebirth, of part of a person's spiritual essence or consciousness passing on to a child. Not a case of the same soul inhabiting a different body after death, but clearly part of a person's spirit inhabiting in the body of another. It's not a transmigration of the soul as in reincarnation, but a very Nordic pagan understanding of the conception of the spirit, which was understood to be divided in various parts, the parts of the self. Again, we return to the concept of the Emingya, which was believed that not only could be inherited by the tradition of name giving, but it could also be lent to someone. So the Emingya, part of a person's personality, which expresses the qualities of that person, was understood to be a personal entity in its own right. And that person's spiritual essence could either go through the process of rebirth when the person dies, obviously, and pass on to another person by giving to that person the name of the original possessor of the Emingya, or sometimes it could be lent to others during life. It's still a question of survival to ensure that after death, part of the person can still live on in another. We can read this, for instance, in Heimskringla, in the accounts of Harald's saga Horfagra, in which Harald Horfagra, in his old age, names his son after him, passing on his name with the sense of his own approaching death, wanting to perpetuate his own existence through his son. This custom, or this tradition of naming a person after a dead person, is indeed connected to the belief of transmigration, but of the spirit. Not in its full sense as in reincarnation, but as said before, transmigration of a part of the spirit, part of the self. And so the spirit of the dead would reborn, sort of, in the living, when the name was used again for a newborn child. As far as it is possible to find in historical terms, this custom was quite common during the migration period. It was quite common to find the name of a child beginning with the same letter as that of the parent, or containing part of the person's name, either the first part of that person's name or the second part of the name. The practice of taking the whole name of a dead relative came in among the Visigoths and Burgundians of the 5th century, and they brought this custom into Scandinavia, and by the end of the 8th century it was fully established. Of course, these dates and the variations of this tradition isn't something we are really certain of in terms of time, space and culture in historical terms. There was, of course, a gradual development. It took its time. So, this idea might actually have begun as a form of reincarnation among other cultures outside the Scandinavian cultural background, cultural panorama. But among Scandinavians, the conception of the soul was quite different and divided into several parts. So, among Old Norse peoples, this tradition reflects the transmigration of a part of the spiritual self, because apparently, due to pre-Christian Scandinavians, a person could exist in a multitude of realities, according to each of the person's parts of the self. What I'm saying here is that the belief in rebirth didn't come with this tradition of name-giving. Rather, the belief in rebirth already existed in Scandinavia before the introduction of this tradition of name-giving. And the belief in rebirth seems to have attached itself to the custom of name-giving. So, in this specific case, it is incorrect to equate rebirth with transmigration of souls. If we understand transmigration as the continual progress of the soul through many bodies, not necessarily human but also human, then we can say that there is no evidences of it in Old Norse literature. What we can say is that it's quite clear that in pre-Christian Scandinavia we are facing the belief in the transferring of the spirit of the dead to the living, and this idea of survival, continuation of existence through time. It is a belief in rebirth. Part of the consciousness of the person will continue to exist in another person. Not a soul in different bodies, and not two souls sharing the same body, but the spirit living and coexisting with the spirit of another. The idea of carrying the ancestral spirits with us. This is rebirth, which is quite different from reincarnation. Remember the previous account of Olaf, Greistad Hofre, and Olaf the Holy, not Olaf the Bloody Snowman. It was not the same soul in different bodies, nor two souls in the same body, but part of one's spirit in the new person who has its own spirit. I hope I've made myself clear. Perhaps this entire subject can be better understood if I tell you that the Old Norse conception of the soul, as we have it in literature, is the exact opposite of what we are used to. Because our societies of today, in religious terms, are based on world-denying religions. That is, religions that mark a clear detachment from this world and aim to reach existence and enlightenment elsewhere. There is always this conception of the soul as being something apart from the physical, something that can be detached from the physical and can live without the body, any body. To the pre-Christian Scandinavians, and well, in fact, before the introduction of Indo-European cultural realities and conceptions of the spiritual, the belief was that there was no such thing as a soul, but rather a spirit that coexists with the body and needs the body to exist and manifest itself in a multitude of realities. In Old Norse literature, the notion that the idea of the spirit as something distinct from the body never enters in Old Norse thought, in the Norse mentality. The spirit is part of a body. It can be human, animal, or something else. And this is an animistic belief, an indigenous conception before the introduction of Indo-European religious conceptions. And it's curious because this notion survived for over a millennia and can still be perceptible in literature, in Old Norse literature. So we are dealing with an animistic conception of the spirit, that everything contains a spirit to be alive, and likewise the spirit needs a body to continue to exist through time in the physical reality. This is why in Old Norse literature we do not find evidences of reincarnation, because the belief in reincarnation requires the belief in the detachment of the soul from the body, the physical body. Instead, the Old Norse peoples believed in rebirth, which is an animistic conception, the need of a body to contain the spirit in order to be alive in the physical reality, and the need of the spirit to inhabit a body to continue to exist in the physical reality. This notion was constructed by the need to survive, to continue on existing in this reality, because in animistic conceptions of the spiritual, there is no such thing as realities elsewhere detached from this world. The world of the gods, world of the dead, world of the spirits, all of it, in an animistic perception, belongs to this world already, as this world is perceived to be the reality where every spirit lives, inhabits, including the divine. Bear it with me. The separation of the soul from the body comes from religions that believe in other realities out of this world, such as a world of the divine, only reachable if one dies, and so the soul is separated from the body and exists in the other world. Whilst in animistic conceptions, the spiritual reality is in this world. So there is no need to have a belief in the separation of the soul from the body, because this reality, this world, is already the spiritual, and thus the only thing that is necessary is to inhabit different physical forms to continue on existing here. And this is the belief in rebirth expressed in many ancient religions that retained indigenous animistic conceptions of the spiritual. Such conceptions before Indo-European religious cultural perceptions were introduced. In fact, the belief in rebirth expressed in Old Norse literature, remoting to a more archaic past, which can still be perceptible among the Sami, for instance, is also very, very similar to the belief in rebirth among the Celts and among other European cultures who retained these indigenous animistic conceptions. And this belief was very strong among the pre-Christian Scandinavians. In fact, as you know, most of the sources were written down already during the Catholic period, and without a doubt, there are Christian influences in the sources, the literary sources. However, this animistic conception of the spirit was quite strong. So strong was the belief in rebirth that it survived the new religious reality, which is Christianity. Christianity brings into the North notions of reincarnation and resurrection. And even among Christian Old Norse peoples, this wasn't at all accepted until very late in Scandinavian history. There is certainly, and it's very well perceptible, a great reluctance in Old Norse literature to disassociate the personality from the body, the physical body, which is why we constantly read in Old Norse literature this tradition of name giving, and part of the spirit of a person passes on to another. This is the hemingja, the personality of a person passes on to another. This doesn't mean, as said before, that we are dealing with a soul living inside somebody else's body. As I've said, the pre-Christian Scandinavians believed that the spirit could be divided into several parts. So the spirit after death could exist in a multitude of realities, including that of the world of the spirits and the physical world. And other parts could be extended to other realities, and the personality of a person could be introduced into the physical body of another person. So the other person would receive the personality of another, which just enhanced that person's own personality. I understand that this might be quite difficult to understand and even to accept, because we are too used to this idea of the separation between soul and body. But this idea of everything possessing a spirit is an animistic conception, and animism is by no means easy to understand in a society almost completely detached from animistic beliefs. But I think we shall get there. I have 3 videos on the subject that might give you some ideas that may help you to understand this whole thing. I'll leave the links down below in the description, don't worry. I think one good example to understand this idea in Old Norse religion, this conception of the spirit that needs physical existence to manifest itself in the physical world, we can better understand this in the conception of a ghost in Old Norse literature. In these sources, when the dead return to visit the living, or more often than not, to cause trouble to the living, the ghost is never the disembodied spirit, but always the animated corpse. Such is the case of the Draugr. It is the spirit of the dead coming in contact with the reality of the living, and it needs a body to maintain that connection with the living and to manifest itself in the physical reality. And the only way to stop a Draugr is by the use of physical force, and the Draugr ceases to cause trouble when its body is destroyed. The destruction of the body releases the spirit within. This is the exact same thing I have spoken in several videos about the reason why objects that were being offered were destroyed in the process of offering. The destruction of objects reflect sacrificial offering. The idea often expressed here is that these objects were offerings and were purposely broken or bent, and the spiritual background of it is that by breaking the object, it releases the essence within. This goes far back into an animistic perception as well, of the animistic perception of the world, in the belief that everything contains a spirit. So by breaking the object or making any sort of damage to it, you are literally killing the object, and as such the spirit of the object is released, and that is what is being offered, the essence of the object, which the Germanic peoples, especially the Norse, called magin, the essence of something, and everything contains that essence, and that essence, magin, is another part of the spirit, one part of the self. The self is composed by several aspects. What this idea of rebirth has in common with other conceptions of the soul is that it is perceived that the spirit is indestructible. As the Druids used to say, everything that exists can be destroyed except one thing, and that is the spirit, the soul. So, perhaps I was wrong, and the question isn't why do we keep returning? If we believe in rebirth like the indigenous pagans believed, perhaps the question is, how long have we been here? We do not keep returning. We never left. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. And remember one thing: to deny the animistic beliefs expressed in Old Norse religion is to fail in understanding the essence of not only Old Norse religion, but paganism as a whole. Many neo-pagan religious organizations and spiritualities, unfortunately, have become Christianizations of paganism and have adopted world-denying mentalities, and therefore are not paganisms at all. Do be careful with that. There is no paganism without animism, and if any seemingly pagan or neo-pagan religion denies animism, it's because they are not interested in actually being pagan and just want to be yet another religion of control. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag. What? No, mate. Bloody hell. The only thing I could think of while recording the video was how badly I need to piss. Oh, still recording, of course.